The conversation today with Corey um, really showed vulnerability and honesty in helping us understand what young men go through when they change careers, when they become a father, the responsibilities, the changes. We talked quite a lot about different things connected with masculinity and where that begins and how we incorporate it. An area that I really wanted to have a good conversation with Corey was around pornography, because he has a personal insight to it, and he is also raising two young boys. So that part of the conversation, I think, is something that, as a parent, it's something we all need to think a little more deeply about and be active in and proactive in how we're having those conversations. So there's a lot of beautiful things in this conversation that will interest you and perhaps entertain you for an hour or so. So I do hope you listen. I hope you look up the work that Corey is doing with his men's groups and any man who is needing to have some support, a group, a community, a village. Corey has things in place that can certainly help with that. So enjoy the episode, and we'll see you next week. Too many boys today feel lost, alone, and misunderstood. Too many parents feel the same. Behind today's troubling statistics is a generation of boys longing to be seen, heard, and valued. And yet the conversation around boys' emotional lives is still far too quiet. This new season of Unlocking the Parenting Code is here to change that. This season you'll hear more real conversations with young men, more expert voices on boys' mental health, more solo episodes where I share truths I've learned firsthand, and more wisdom from parents walking this road right now. It's time to open our eyes, open our hearts, and become the change our boys need. Boys aren't broken. They're waiting for us to truly see them, hear them, and stand with them. So tune in to Unlocking the Parenting Code for real conversations, real hope, and a new path forward for our boys. It's time. They're ready. Are we? Welcome back to Unlocking the Parenting Code, all about boys. I'm your host, Kathy, and today I'm welcoming Corey Baum. Corey is the founder of the Evolved Men Project, a life coach and a mentor who helps men build confidence, strengthen relationships, and live with more purpose and connection. He's also a dad to two boys, ages 7 and 11, which makes this conversation about masculinity, father, and growth even more meaningful. Corey brings a mix of honesty, personal experience, and practical tools to his work, and hopefully to our conversation today. Welcome to the show, Corey.
Hey, Kathy, thanks for having me.
Corey, if someone was meeting you for the first time and wanted to know who you are, not just what you do, what would you want them to know?
Mm, it's a good question. I think that there's more to the story than is probably on the surface, right? I think like anybody that we walk around from day to day, and I think like anybody, we walk around from day to day wearing a lot of different hats, and I use hats specifically in different than masks. But with that I wear a lot of different hats, and I'm a very empathetic and supportive and loving person, right? That community is super important to me, and family, and with that, not only am I a dad and a coach and a friend and a partner and all of those sort of things, but connecting with other people and supporting them and really meeting them where they're at, is something that I feel strongly about, right? So I may be wearing the business hat at any given time or the dad hat or any of these sort of things, but really at my core, that there's a lot more that probably meets the eye.
So, what would you say your core values are?
Yeah. My core values are integrity, discipline, and community and family.
Interesting. I haven't heard someone say a core value was discipline. Tell me more.
Yeah. So one of the things that along my journey that has really come up time and time again, and my journey has been not just about, um, I mean, it's always been about my own development, but there's been different threads that have gone throughout that. And one of the things that I've seen with any of it, and to be honest, discipline is kind of a new one for me, that with any of these sort of things that I'm working on or I'm focusing on, it takes a sense of discipline, right? It's not just, at least for me, at least, it's not reading, attending the seminar or listening to somebody or reading the content and being able to embody it and put it into my life that it takes a real sense of discipline to do the thing even when I don't want to, right? And one of the things for me that I think is kind of a good example of this is that probably about a year ago, I bought a cold plunge, right? And so every morning and I don't, there's a lot of this that I don't enjoy necessarily when I think about it, but I'm up every morning at 5 a.m. and my goal is to get out of the cold plunge by 5:15, and that's spending 3 minutes in it at, I think right now I have it set at 37 degrees, right? And so for me, that's an opportunity. Like if I did nothing else throughout the day, that was an opportunity for me to kind of face to embody discipline, to do the things that maybe I don't necessarily want to do, or in those moments I'm struggling to do, regard of the stories or the challenges that's kind of coming up. So I think discipline more than motivation is really key to moving the needle in the direction towards our goals.
What do you think is the difference between discipline and intentionality? Like, because some of the things you were saying, it sounded very similar.
Yeah, I would probably have to, look at a dictionary to really discern the differences between discipline and being intentional. Um, but to me, at least, discipline, I feel like comes with an essence of doing the thing even when you don't want to.
Mm,
Uh, Whereas when I think for myself of being intentional, that's more about being forward thinking,
mm,
thinking about things before it comes up. And so discipline for me is hearing and acknowledging that voice and doing what's necessary in that moment. And it's not always like, for me at least, that isn't always like, crush the voice or like kill the demon. It's like, hey, let's spend some time with it, getting to know it and understanding its perspective. But at the end of that, like, hey, we're still going to get in the cold plunge.
mm. Yeah.
Oh.
Okay, that's actually that was a good distinction. That made it a little bit clearer. So let's start back with your younger years and like your home life, as far as the men that were around you and the messages that you absorbed about, what it really means to be a male.
And I've given this some thought over time, trying to look at where I picked these sort of things up. And I mean, if we're really to kind of go back to the very beginning, my parents divorced pretty early. I want to say I was probably like five, earlier than I really remember. I've only got a few glimpses of them being together and nothing really memorable. But so they were divorced. My mom remarried not too long after, and that relationship was kind of toxic for a lot of different reasons. And so it definitely for me, looking back, there was a lot of alcoholism and such during that time, that a lot of fighting. That definitely was no role model, right? And when I think back to that, like I feel like I didn't even know, like what a role model that I should be looking for. That like, oh hey, like that wasn't even a person that I was like, oh hey, these are things that I can be picking stuff up from, right? I just knew that it was somebody that it was in a position that wasn't a great environment. Um, my father on the other hand, so my parents were divorced, and my father on the other hand, I left my mother. I chose to leave at 12 and go to move in with my dad, right? And um, my my dad comes from a background himself of being four brothers. It was all a military family. Four brothers. Their dad, my grandfather, was a pilot in the war. He was a bomber pilot. And so that had him away from the family, from my understanding, for the majority of his childhood, right? And so I can only imagine the what life was like as a mother or my grandmother with four boys all to yourself. Um, and so there wasn't, for him, I don't know that there was really much of an example as well of what like healthy masculinity was like, and especially at that time. And so I really, interestingly, as we talk about this, that from the time that I moved in, my dad was away for a lot of my childhood as well. He worked in Alaska, and it was usually like 6 months on and 6 months off, where he'd be up there working and he'd be back for 6 months. And there was so I think that throughout that there wasn't a whole lot of opportunities, or there wasn't a lot of great examples of somebody in my day-to-day life that was in that place or in that position that was reflecting or mirroring for me of what it looked like, what masculinity in general looked like, and the time that he was there. And I want to preface all of this, at the end, that I do think that my dad was kind of doing the best with the cards he was dealt. But yeah, looking back, like even when he was there, it was we had a very disconnected sort of relationship. And I found later in life that really, I found that showed up almost exactly in how I was for myself. Right. And so he was there, like eh, food was always on the table. There was always a house over my head. Right. But conversations and connections were very surface level, right? There was never any like guidance or support, or like there was never, I didn't go through my core values. Like I never really even considered them until a few years ago. Right. So like none of these sort of things were ever a part of my life.
Was it just you
Uh,
and your dad? Just the two of you?
no, it was my stepmom who I lived with. It was me, her, and my dad. And while he was gone, it was me and my stepmom.
So that's a really big decision to make when you're 12 years old. Like a 12-year-old boy is just beginning puberty. It's a very emotional time. That's a huge change in your life. How did you come up with that? And then that it was okay. So if there in the time that you were living with your mom, did you stay in steady contact with your dad so that your relationship was quite strong when you made the decision and it was allowed for you to go and live with him?
So I think that the relationship with my mom and my stepdad at the time was not the greatest, right? And back then, it wasn't to the point necessarily of like there was no abuse on my part or anything like that, but like it was, they weren't doing good for themselves. And the times that I did spend with my dad, right, we were camping, we were doing boy things, right? Maybe we were working on something it was just like that's where I wanted to be. That's where I felt connected and I don't know, a sense of like a masculine sort of presence. And so I just felt myself drawn to that, right? That I really enjoyed the weekends at best that I got to spend with my dad. And somewhere along the way, I don't remember how it got implanted in me, but where I live in Washington State in the US, at the time at least, I don't know what it is now, but at 12 years old, I remember it being that you were allowed to make a decision on what parent that you wanted to live with.
Wow.
Right. And it wasn't so much that I I was going to need to go to court about it, but I just remember that at 12 years old, it could have been something like, hey, it was fed to me by my dad or whatever it was, right? But knowing that even him and my mom didn't have the best relationship as well, but knowing that like, hey, if it did go to court at 12 years old, this kid can make a decision about which parent that he wanted to live with. So I remember it being like basically at 12 years old, I'm like packing my stuff and heading out the door.
Are you an
Um,
only child?
I was at the time. Yeah. My
Okay.
my next siblings, I have two younger I think it's half brothers and a
Hmm.
half sister. And I want to say that the next one is like 12 years younger.
Okay.
So really to that point, I think the oldest one of those was really only like one or two when I left my mom's at the time, my mom's house. And so I didn't have any siblings at my dad's at that time.
How did your mom feel about that?
We've had that conversation recently, and interestingly, in that she said it was really super hard for her, um, which isn't really something that I remember picking up on back then. I don't even remember how I was 11 or 12, and I don't even remember how the conversation went. But she said that it was super hard for her, but she knew that at the time that was going to be the best decision for me moving forward. And she tells me now that she had a lot of reservations about what that would look like, you know, say as an example, right? Knowing that maybe at times my dad is maybe not very present or passive or focused on work or any of these other things, weighing those kind of things for herself, but still feeling like, hey, the boy needs that opportunity, if nothing else, to be able to have that connection with his dad.
So when yeah, like you shared before, this idea that you learned about how to stay small, like to be very observant, to adapt to what was going on, to avoiding conflict. Was that all in the time period before you moved in with your dad? Like, is that when connected with living with your mom and your stepfather?
I think it probably played a part in it. As I think about it, in both households, I can feel a sense of um, kind of shape shifting in a sense, in order like everybody really liked when I did the right thing, right? That there's a sense that people don't like it when you do the wrong thing. And I say wrong or right with air quotes, but in my mind, I can see where I was doing the thing that I interpreted was going to be best accepted. Right. And even so to answer your question, I don't know that it was necessarily something directly with my mom's house and leaving that I really picked that up back then, but I could see where I feel like maybe in being an only child and where how things were in that household that I wanted to be the least of anybody's worries, if that makes
So,
sense, right? So I wasn't
yeah, it
bringing any
does.
more issues to the table.
So how do you think that impacted, as you became a young man and then how, after you became a father?
Ugh, man, this is the and these sort of things that they don't happen, at least they haven't for me. They didn't happen consciously. I don't remember until, I started doing the work, started going to therapy and things like that. I don't remember actually recognizing in the moment, hey, I'm completely changing myself and my thoughts and my opinions to really like facilitate this moment and how this person is going to interpret me. So it's not until really like looking back that I can see how for most of my life, even to an extent, going through um, school and dating and friendships and marriage and kids and all of that, how for so long I was really, I kind of tell the story at times that I was carrying around a backpack of masks at any given time where I was, I'd I'd pull out, and at times it's a bit of a juggling act to remember which one was which, but putting on the one that I felt like in the moment was most fitting to the situation or the person that I was with, right? Like, oh, this is the person that I had to be. And yeah, so back to the actual question of it though, and even with my kids that I, in like taking a step back, I was never necessarily, I felt like taking a leadership role, right? We talk about being intentional. Um, I was just, I was like, it was kind of like Groundhog's Day. I was waking up in the morning, I was living life, but there was no thought given to the direction that I was going because I was going to do whatever I needed to in that moment to keep keep the peace between everybody, to whatever was necessary, but I didn't have a purpose. I didn't have a why. I didn't have necessarily a goal. I mean, I might have some like small goals from time to time, but there was no real sense of direction, right? And even when it came to my kids, and this is something that we talked about before, for me there was kind of a moment where I really like, it's almost like looking into my kids' eyes and seeing like the snow falling at Christmas, right? But to like see a snow globe inside their eyes of like what it was that I was really missing, right? And I tell the story sometimes of almost like looking through them, that I wasn't actually there. And it wasn't until, as I say this, and this wasn't rehearsed, but like, it wasn't until I felt like I was having some of those moments where I saw Santa Claus inside the snow globe that, that it really kind of came awake for me.
So when I think about your story with your boys, and you said that you divorced about 4 years ago, right?
Mhm.
So they would have been around 3 and 7. So part of me, as you were telling the first, the first part of our conversation was like, do you see any kind of a pattern between, what's happened to you as a father and then what happened to you with your father and then your father with his father?
To your point, though, I think that there is definitely a pattern in all of this, right? To probably the relationship between my grandfather and my father, right? I see and this is something that I'm actually working to discover and discuss more with my father. And we could have quite a few episodes about that story, but to really get to understand like what his experience was like, to better understand who it is that he is. Because honestly, like, on part of my journey here, I've realized like I don't have any idea who he is. Right. Like, I mean, he told me how to chop wood and like how to fix things and a lot of these sort of things. But beyond that, like, I don't really have any idea. Like, how did he come to that conclusion? Why does he feel that way? Why does he vote that way? Like, I don't, none of that. And so I can see a real, and I didn't know my grandfather. He died pretty early in my childhood. So I can't even say like, oh man, my grandfather was my go-to guy. I don't know the guy. Um, but what I imagine and the stories that I have heard between my father is that it sounds really similar to the way that I was raised. And for when that I see that same sort of patterns, especially before I divorced in myself and my kids. And and even more so in who my oldest and my boys in general, who they're becoming of me, right? So I found myself as they were younger doing the same things, saying the same things, like it just comes out of your mouth and you're like, oh God, that happened. And I wasn't always proud of that. I wasn't always proud of those things that I did, the things that I said. Um, and I found for myself some of the like most impactful moments for me have been watching my 11-year-old son now, and he's a carbon copy of me, Catherine. Like he just at times is, I see so much of myself in him. And at times, some of the things that he struggles with, and now, we have an entirely different relationship, right? Since I've been in this work and doing it. But I pick out these nuances, and I can see now how easy that is to perpetuate that through his entire life, right? Knowing, so I'm highly sensitive to it, but being able to pick up on it now and take action to not like manipulate or to change him, but to just plant some seeds, and changing my own behavior or being a better example of some of these other like qualities or traits. So to answer your question, yeah, I mean, there is absolutely a correlation between all of this happening.
Um, when I was doing a little bit of research about um, divorce, motherhood, fatherhood, and that kind of things, and I looked at some statistics in the States, and it was really high. The percentage of divorces that happen within 8 years of a marriage, and that the number of couples that had had children during those 8 years was really high. So it was kind of like this correlation between having children and those first 8 years of marriage. And, I was thinking about fatherhood and all of the things that are connected with that, and, masculinity and the extra stress that comes from the new responsibilities, or the responsibilities that you feel, and sleepless nights, and readjusting your relationship with your partner. Like, it is a huge um transition time, a transformation time in your relationship as a family. So I wonder if you can, like, I'd be really interested to, and I'm sure other people, because if it's that high of a statistic, then it's something that a lot of men perhaps struggle with when they first, the first few years of having young children, and how that's affecting you as a man, like what, the changes, the everything.
There's so many different areas to explore there. So if at any time I start running off in a direction, feel free to rope me in. But I think for myself, as I went through that time, and this will tell a little bit of more about who I am. But I before about the time that I got married, leading up to that, I was racing motorcycles all across the country, semi-professionally, right? I was making a little bit of money at it, but really, if nothing else, like I was kind of what I thought at the time, like living the dream, right? And these were, high performance motorcycles. So I'm leaned over, dragging knee, and I'm, for all intents and purposes, like I'm living my best life. I'm generally like heading out of town on a Thursday afternoon, driving for me, in the States here, going from Washington to Nevada, Las Vegas, right? Everything kind of west of the Mississippi is how we divide it. And, I was kind of on my own and living my best life at the time, at least at what I knew to it. So when my wife and I married, it was a time for me when I was changing up a lot of different things in my life. Being that I wasn't like hitting it big in motorcycle racing, I also had a lot of debt that went with that. And so, upon getting married, I really started to kind of focus, and with the help of her, but focusing, like opening up my mind to other things other than just racing, right? And so I really focused for a period of time of paying off all my stuff and exploring other things. And at the time, I really got into hiking and mountaineering and climbing and such. And it wasn't until it was pretty soon after that we got married that we found out we were pregnant with our first son. Right. And so, kind of to your point, for me, I went from living this very, I guess, like probably a life where there wasn't a lot of concern for other people's life, direction, anything that you want to call that, to getting married and pretty soon thereafter being a father, right? So going from doing kind of whatever it is that I wanted to now, and my oldest, he's funny. Like from the moment he came out, he was kind of a needy guy. He was very loud. He didn't sleep very well. He was the like drive him around the block at all hours of the night to get him to go to sleep, wearing out the carpet, walking up and down the house. And so, yeah, it was a real life change. And and it's always easy to look back and be like, oh, well, you know, um, could have done this differently, could have done that differently, or to even point the finger as to why it went that way. But I definitely think that I didn't know what I was getting myself into, and I didn't have the skills or the role models or the examples to really, I feel like, to propel myself forward into like to give myself a chance at being successful. And as I say that, that feels really cringy, like I'm playing the victim here, like, oh, it wasn't my fault. And that's not what I'm trying to portray, but really kind of give a sense or an essence that it is a lot it takes a lot of effort, right? And I think it's really important to have had those foundational sort of experiences along the way to give you kind of a path or a direction for when things do get hard.
Well, it kind of sounds like you were dealing with more than just fatherhood. Like that's a big like career transition as a like when I think about I used to ride a motorcycle too, not professional, not, but I know a little bit about that world just because kind bikers let me hang out with them sometimes. And that's a very male world. And to go from that kind of it's not that you don't have responsibilities, but it's very much like and I could be wrong, like I don't know what it's like in the States. So, but here there definitely is a high sense of pride about riding in these groups and extremely highly skilled drivers. But there's this, this real sense of pride and accomplishment and maleness around it all. So to go from a lifestyle where that was the norm and the average and independent, and then moving into both dealing with a relationship and then soon after, working on a relationship, you have to readjust that relationship to include, a child coming in. So both with the relationship and with a career change. Those are real heavy stressors. And then if you add financial things on top of that, financial, issues are one of the highest reasons for there to be trouble in a relationship. When I was raising my son, I longed for a guide, something real, honest, and grounded in what boys truly need. So I created the book that I wish I'd had. Packed with tools and real world strategies that actually work, you'll learn how to nurture his emotional world and finally understand the feelings behind his behavior. Because boys don't need punishment, they need guidance. We'll bust the myths that keep boys boxed in and help you support him through the real challenges of growing up. Most of all, it's about transforming your connection, one small moment at a time. Raising boys who become remarkable men. Get your copy today, and let's create a beautiful future together. You went on to have another child.
I did. Glutton for a punishment. Yeah. And I think at the time though, and I think it's still so prevalent in a lot of what goes on with men today is that for myself, at least at the time, that I was still just living my life on autopilot, right? Not really recognizing at that time where things were hard or where I was struggling or and in the moment, yeah, absolutely, it was probably like, this is hard. This isn't the way that I was imagining in it. Um, I definitely, there's a lot of things that I was probably had imagined, I guess, would be differently, or that I would have been a different sort of father. But you just wake up and you do it again the next day, right? And again, kind of going back to that narrative, how I wasn't really like, I didn't have, I wasn't leading my own life anywhere through there. Um, and especially at the place at which I stopped racing, right? And that's, I mean, that's something to really kind of that we can unpack as well of how in getting to that relationship and in there with the child that although now I would have really have liked to have been able to have approached it from a place of pride and leadership, that it became, probably almost like a burden and that I didn't know what to do. Right. And so I think the things that maybe I struggled with at the time, or how I could have moved from a place of passivity to leadership, either for myself or for the family, that having those conversations were really scary. Right? There was a lot on the line. Right. I had one kid at the time and another one to be around later that if at any point I wanted to like change my mind or start doing something differently, that there was a lot riding on the line. And so it was just easier to, again, like we see this pattern of how, like, you know what, it's just easier to keep quiet. Like, let's just keep going with the flow. And the less that anybody knows about how you really feel, the easier that'll probably be.
So, what was the breaking point?
I think for me, it was, and when I tell this story at times, that I feel like it can come off as very grounded and altruistic, right? Like, oh, I had this moment, I think everybody wants to hear this story of like, oh, I looked into my kids' eyes and I knew right then. And there's a part of that that's true, right? But at the core of it, I knew at the end of my relationship, like I had been doing things, what I was doing wasn't right. Right. And it wasn't just that like, oh, I want to be a different person. Like I had become something that even to say that like I wasn't proud of it is an understatement. And I knew like I didn't know what the end result was going to be, but I knew it wasn't going to be pretty. Right. And I knew that I couldn't at some point this is all going to come to a head. And it was either going to end horrifically, right? Or I needed to burn everything to the ground. I didn't know what to fix. I didn't know where to necessarily start. I knew that I wasn't happy. And I felt like the only way that I was ever going to be able to make an attempt at something different was to burn everything down. and that's not like, burn it down and never talk to your kids again and do any of that sort of thing. But I knew that I wasn't happy in my relationship. I hadn't necessarily identified at that point like what I needed to change in myself, but I wasn't happy and I knew that it wasn't going to end well.
So you mentioned that some of the ways that you dealt with stress or the situation was, I think if I remember what I read, um, overachievement, alcohol, and pornography. Were those the three? So so when you look at, like you just said, the person you were at the time before you left is not a person that now you're proud of. How, how do you deal with that with your boys? Like one of the things that I would really worries me as an adult with young children, especially boys, growing up today is pornography because it is a huge issue. And there's, a lot of research out there that's saying the impact it can have on the development of children, and that children, because of the internet, because of social media, are being exposed to pornography at younger and younger ages. Like the average age of introduction, that one of the places I read was between 8 and 12. Most often, it's because they stumble upon it. So it's something I think that parents really have to almost be proactive. A lot of people are really uncomfortable. I think a lot of women don't understand well enough about, how men view pornography as to how women view pornography. I think there's a difference there. But when I think about young children, I think it's a conversation that parents need to have. What are we going to do for our children? So now you've got boys that are 7 and 11. So what's your take
Mhm.
on that whole world for them?
Yeah, I think that pornography is it's almost like hijacking or taking away their opportunity that to experience certain aspects of life in kind of a natural sort of way. And something that for instance I talk about a bit with both of my boys right now is social media and technology and YouTube and things like that. And we talk about sometimes like, hey, having boundaries and limits around that and like what's acceptable. And part of the conversation is like, hey, there is tens of thousands of people out there. We talk about like how hard it is to pull ourselves away from that sometimes. And even at 11, my oldest, who is very very intelligent, can say like, dad, man, it's so hard for me sometimes to get pulled away from that. So he at 11, like he doesn't
Yeah.
understand necessarily what's going on. And so part of that conversation we talk about is like, hey man, there's tens of thousands of people, maybe even hundreds of thousands of people that their sole purpose in their career is to keep you plugged in, to gain your attention. And so, yeah, it's hard. Like you're basically at war with all of those people on any given day, fighting for your sense of like sovereign entity, or if that's even a word, right? But for your own sense of self. And so I think that and I don't necessarily stand on this pedestal and wave a flag that like, porn should be banned. But man, I tell you what, like it really, I would say that it's like it has a similar impact to serious drugs and what it does in somebody's developmental, and I don't have any science backing in this of what it actually does, but yeah, I can imagine from my own experience how it completely inhibits and rewires how people process life. And it's not even in just how they relate to women, right? But how they relate to themselves and how they relate to life. It's and not even from like the okay, there's women or whatever it is, but really like at a chemical level, the relationship that they have at like the gratification loop, right? Or the effort that goes into life, right? So, hey, you know what? I don't have to actually like go to the gym or work hard or get good grades. I don't have to work hard for anything because it's just going to be handed to me. I don't have to do those things in order to find a partner. Like, I don't have to go through the trials and tribulations to make myself into a solid candidate because I can just like I can sit in my house and never go to the gym and watch porn and get probably something really similar to what the end result is, right? And I'm sure that there's science that backs this up that the amount of chemicals that are released in your brain as a result of this thing is probably near a drug addiction,
Yeah.
right? And so they learn like, hey, I have to work really hard for this, and it takes a lot of effort, but I don't have to over here. And so for me, and it looked a lot differently probably before my divorce, but with my relationship now, with my kids, I'm all about getting out in front of any of those sort of things and having the conversations now. And I think that for me in my life, I still to this day, I don't think I've ever had a conversation with my dad around one time we had a conversation, I feel like around sexuality. Definitely never had one around porn. And it wasn't a very constructive conversation. It was a very like male, like, plenty of fish in the sea, you
Yeah.
know, sort of thing. And not around like what the real impacts could be of these sort of things, and so I think it's super important to have the awkward conversation, awkward if you want to make it, but to have these conversations with them so that they understand that there's an impact to this. And that's something that I think as a parent and as a father that they don't always know. And we talk about this a lot. Like you don't for yourself, Corbin, that's my oldest, you don't always know and you're not always aware in the moment of the impact of your actions right now. And it's my responsibility to create some boundaries around that so that you can safely learn for yourself, right? What's right.
I've seen an awful lot of marriages, like more than I wish I was seeing, who have, like the marriages have crumbled and they're directly, it's all around pornography. And like you said, because it becomes like a drug and the addiction is so intense that communication breaks down completely, understanding, and compassion for both people involved. I think it's an area that we don't talk about. And I think if we talked about it more, we would normalize it a little bit better. And, for our boys, the first thing I would think is understanding, like understanding the differences. Like it's really difficult. I grew up in a time where if you they had Playboy and Hustler on the top shelf of the drugstore, and you had to ask for it. Like, it was like that was even before, having the mail deliver your copy if that's what your choice was. So it was not so easy. But because it is so easy and it's so easy to come across it online by accident. Like I still will be doing searches for things connected, if I'm going into a school and I'm going to be taking over a class and it's doing this certain thing, I'll do my research online. And if I'm, doing something about the rainforest, all of a sudden I'm getting all these shots of a nude community in
Mm.
the rainforest. And it's kind of, I know what to do about that, but what about your, 8-year-old, 9-year-old who they come across that and it's like, whoa. And because especially with the online pornography, because it is such a big business, there is so much on there that is really harmful. Like it's not just your normal pornography. There are things there that are just going to really that no child at that age especially should ever have to witness. So the conversations, I think, no matter how uncomfortable they are, I think they're really important. Like I know I talk to our son a lot, mostly when he got a little bit older, because then that's when the internet started. And it was basically, if you come across something, tell me. Let's
Let's talk about it.
we'll look at it together and we'll talk
Yeah.
about it. Is this real? Is this like it didn't I don't have any of those barriers, I guess. But there was also a point in time when a question came to me and I didn't feel equipped. And it was like, I think you need to talk to your dad. And those conversations and that understanding between the two genders, you know, how does it play out different? How are we addicted to it differently? How do we view it differently so that it doesn't sabotage our relationships? And with more understanding and more communication, then maybe there would be less addiction. But it's a little frightening to me that it's so available and yet there's so little conversation to especially help our boys.
Yeah, it's I think it's definitely a unregulated like vulnerability,
Hmm.
basically, that I feel like is really taking things kind of covertly by storm. And what's interesting is that as I say that, it's not just, yeah, I mean, we know that the putting this in place in the youth has such an impact downstream, right? But there's still grown men that, as you talked about, the divorce rates, right? And all throughout life where this is causing
Yeah,
problems with that as well. So it's not
yeah,
like, oh, we get older and it's okay, right? Like
yeah.
there's still with any of this, there's impacts if it's not handled appropriately, right? And so
Hmm.
I'm not necessarily here to tell everybody what it is that they should do, but I think with like a lot of things in life that when you take anything to excess that there's ramifications to it.
And without understanding, then there's confusion. The more you can
Mm.
understand, the more you can communicate, the better your choices are going to be for yourself. When
Well,
it's
to
the
that,
deep, deep, dark corners of something, it's like there is a
yeah,
pull. It's like, oh,
yeah,
I want to see what that's all about.
yeah. Well, and that's the thing. I think that when, especially around not having the conversations with our kids, with our boys, that they're either going to come up with their own idea of whether it's right or wrong, what it means, any of that sort of stuff, or we can help facilitate that for them about what it is. And maybe it means like, hey, let's talk about it. Let's sit down and look at what it is like the reality of this. And let's have an actual conversation about it so that when it does come up, it's not this spooky, dark sort of thing that has
Yeah.
that draw and that pull to it, right? And I fully believe in any of that with my kids, right? Like, hey, let's get this out in the open now, and so that I have an opportunity to put my 2 cents in, to talk about this, to paint a picture of what it really is.
Something else you said about the challenge. You said one of the biggest challenges that boys today face is learning how to be themselves in a world that is constantly telling them who they should be. What do you think are the biggest influences, and how do you kind of work with that with your own boys?
So I think the biggest influences of that is just society, right? I think that there is a story and a thread that goes through just about every aspect of life from the time in which we're born until present moment that we're picking it up. And this is, it's like marketing, it's like propaganda, right? That's happening all throughout our lives of what we're supposed to be, what that image looks like what it means to be a man, and that we're never necessarily like stepping back and deciding for ourselves or for themselves. What do I believe? Right? Hey, I learned and I'm thinking as, my kids, hopefully, like, I remember growing up that my dad talked about core values and all of these other sort of things, but I don't know that that really lines up for me. And so I feel like that there's almost like a programming that's they're getting force fed from birth that they don't really know, but coming up with their own conclusions about how they came to that decision or why that they feel that way. That like, hey, I feel this way because to feel anything differently is going to be abrasive. It's going to go against the norms. It's going to lose me acceptance, right? It's going to lose me popularity with the women. It's going to any of these other sort of things. One of the things I remember throughout my youth and even until, recently, that a lot of my position with women was very, I don't want to be that guy. I feel like there was a lot around society around like not being aggressive, not, I feel like society had kind of gone from being, they call it like toxic masculinity, and it ended up in kind of a place of being extremely passive. Right. I was like, well, hey, I don't want to offend anyone. And I think that I really, that was imprinted on me as a viewing and listening to the murmur, to the rumble that was going on in society about how a man behaves and how a man is supposed to behave or what the right way to sort of do things is. And and you can fight that in any direction about like what the right answer is, but for me, I feel like it really comes down to having that sense of like core values and making that decision for yourself, based on your own internal compass about what it means to be a man and what masculinity looks like to you.
How do you kind of develop that in your boys? Like when you talk about the influences, and yes, society is a big influence. A lot of that is connected with unconscious gender bias. So they are living in a world where expectations are being put on them, stereotyped behavior is being placed on them. Like, do you address it directly, or like how do you handle it?
So for myself, I live by this saying to an extent that lessons are caught, not taught, right? Meaning that it's caught in the things that I do or in the the people that I allow to surround my children, right? That's really where the big influences are going to be made. And so I, nobody's going to probably get more time with my kids outside of society and social media, but than me, right? And so being that poster for what a good example is, and it really starts with me and the conversations and how we navigate these sort of things and the way that I live my life, right? They see that, every day dad is willing to have these vulnerable or hard conversations, or dad comes back and has a conversation with us when he things didn't go the way that he liked, right? That um maybe he, I hate to use the word fail, but failed at something that he was doing, or it just didn't go that way. That, hey, instead of dad being like, and this is a conversation that we have with my kid, like, dad, I thought that you weren't scared of anything, right? Or dad, I just had this impression of you like you never did anything wrong, right? And having the conversation with him and being like, man, let me tell you what, like I have messed up more things than I have probably ever gotten right, right? And really trying to like paint life and the picture really how it is, at least for me in that, and not try to paint it or put some sort of a veneer over the top of it of like, oh, well, hey, men don't cry. Men don't have feelings. Men just push through, right? Well, that's not how it actually goes. We do, right? And it's the suppression of those that leads to so many other things. So with my kids, I find that it's really important to just to first and foremost to be that image myself of what it is that I want to instill in them. And after that, being very steadfast. And this is something that I've had the conversation a few times with different people in my life, that I only want people I only get to pick so many opportunities in my life with for the people that I choose to be around my kids. Right? I don't always get to pick the social media and the things that happen throughout the day or the people that walk by, but the people that I do get those positions, they're going to be powerful, right? They're not going to be people that I don't feel like are going to not, that I feel like are not going to be a healthy contribution to their life, right? And that, like, that hurts people at times, right? Their grandfather was a great example of that, and I said just that phrase to him. Hey man, like, you were in a hugely powerful position, and I don't want anyone to be there if they're not fully invested in being a healthy representation of what it looks like.
Well, it's interesting because that kind of takes us right back, like when you brought your father up again, it takes us right back to when you were um, that in the initial part of this conversation. And I remember I had wanted to jump in there and I kind of held my tongue. So I'm glad you this came around again. But when you were saying that, really there's a lot about your dad that you don't know because you didn't have these kinds of conversations you did that you're having with your boys and all of that. And part of it is generational, I think. But I remember the same thing with my dad, and it was the first time I had gone to therapy as a young adult in my late 20s. And in trying to understand more about my father and my own roots, I went back to him and said that for some course or whatever, I told a little white lie, but I needed to understand about his life. And so I wanted to do an interview with him over a course of, the 2 weeks that I was visiting home. And I ended up with like, at that time, it was cassette players and cassettes. And so I ended up with like 10 cassettes, so like 10 hours of interviews with my dad. And it was like, holy smokes, I didn't know that man was inside. And I must say, I thought I knew my dad quite well, like as far as what he stood for, and he was a good role model for me. But there were so many parts of his life that when I heard about them, it's like you just get this bigger picture of your dad. And it's such a beautiful gift to give to your children. Like when they can see the human rather than
Yeah.
just the father. It's a beautiful gift to give your children. So I think each generation just, improves a little bit in communication.
That's the idea. I don't want to keep perpetuating these things.
Exactly. Move forward, move up. So
Yeah.
before we finish today, Corey, is there anything that we didn't talk about that you wish we had of?
I think really, we talked a lot around the necessity of, male role models and really just kind of what that looks like. But to really continue to expand on that is the need and the necessity. It doesn't just end at childhood. I think there's a real, especially within men, there's a real need for connection and community.
Yeah.
And, I think once we get past, the football days in high school and college, that men are really, especially now more than ever, like really, really struggling with these things, and they don't have anywhere to go. They don't have anyone to connect with. And I think that it's tearing apart the fabric of that, that it's just such a, what they call it, like an epidemic sort of thing, that it's a real crisis, I feel like, at this
Mhm.
point. And so just know that there's other men out there that are doing the same work. They're struggling with the same sort of things, and that they're not alone, and that, um, yeah, it's needed.
It's needed and it's exciting that there are more people doing the work that you're doing. There's still not near enough. But yes, we've lost our villages. And so I think men especially need to have access to these platforms, to these groups, to these services, so that they can have that village back again. And so I think the work you're doing is very, very important.
Mm,
So
thank you.
speaking of that, where can people connect with you and learn more about the work?
Yeah, so my website is the best place for that. Evolvemenproject.com. Everything's on there. I'll be kicking off in January a remote-based or an online community where men can come and learn and be heard and be supported and things like that. So best place really is my website. And
Okay, well, I'll make sure I put that in the show notes for everyone. And I do hope people do. Do you do live things as well with men?
so I do live things with, or are you talking in person?
Yes, sorry, in person.
Yes, yeah, yeah. I mean, they're all live in some sense,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
yeah, I am currently facilitating a men's group locally. But I'm not doing any sort of workshops or anything like that at the moment, but stay tuned. I would love
yeah,
to. I
yeah.
love more than any, I mean, the remote thing is fantastic, but the real magic happens when you're in person and
Yeah, the
yeah.
energy is just there.
Hmm.
Yeah. Well, and I think that especially when you're in I was going to say live again, but when you're in a situation where you're actually connected with the human beings, when men who are leading these things, when they are able to show their vulnerability and share their stories, then that whole concept of, stoicism just kind of unravels. And I think it opens the opportunity for other men to think, oh, if he can do
Hmm.
that, if he can say that, then, maybe I can share and maybe I can get some support here too. So I think it's a practice that there needs more of it. There needs to be more support, more guidance, more community. Community is really, really important. So I
Yeah.
know how precious time is, and I hope that you feel that I've honored yours today. And it's been such a pleasure to talk with you, and I really appreciate how vulnerable you were in a lot of different areas. And I think it will impact, young men that are listening, and any parents that are listening, because our little boys grow up to be big boys. So thank you very much for the conversation, Corey.
Thank you, Kathy.
And thank you to our listeners for joining us on Unlocking the Parenting Code, all about boys. Be sure to check out Corey's links in the show notes. And don't forget to subscribe, share, and tune in next week for more conversations about boys and men. Thank you for sharing your time with me today. Every conversation we have here is a step toward raising boys who feel seen, heard, and deeply valued. If you're looking for more support on this journey, I invite you to visit me at sonhoodcoaching.com. You'll find a link in the show notes. And as always, thank you for being part of this important movement. Until next time, take good care.